Welcome to First to Follower podcast, presented by Youth for Christ USA. First to Follower aims to address the unique challenges and opportunities youth ministry leaders face today. Through engaging discussions and expert insights, we aim to provide practical guidance, relevant resources, and support for the spiritual formation of youth leaders as they navigate the complexities of reaching and discipling the next generation. I'm your host, Cory Huffman, and on this episode, I'm welcoming on Rebalance Program Director Megan Packard and YFC Leader Formation Specialist Chip Pierce. Megan Packard works with YFC USA and Northern Colorado YFC, running the Rebalance program, which she developed and launched 9 years ago. Rebalance is designed to support growth, connection, and resilience in young people through intentional, relationship-centered practices. She is also a trained, Trust Based Relational Intervention practitioner and has her master's degree in Therapeutic Recreation. Chip Pierce works with the Leader Formation team of Youth for Christ USA and also has a graduate degree in counseling psychology and was a licensed professional counselor for almost 14 years before working for YFC. Today, we are talking about navigating mental wellness with leaders and youth.
All right. Hey, Chip. Hey, Megan. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, Cory. Doing well. Hi, Megan.
Hi, guys. Doing great. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you guys on. Today, we're going to be jumping into this topic of mental health. But before we jump into that and some of those really, really good questions we have, I know that we've all been in youth ministry for a long time, have a lot of background with direct ministry with kids. I think it's fun to start out by thinking back to some of the like really fun moments and some of the sweet moments of ministry, as our folks who are listening are probably in the throes of some of that right now. So as you think back, what's maybe a funny or bizarre or weird moment that you can remember as you think about being in direct ministry?
Well, I've got a great story of a youth that we created this program called Rebalance that is for mental health. But before we called it Rebalance, we called it ER, which stood for emotional regulation. And we, piloted it with some of our own kids and their friends. And the very first time that kids showed up, this one little boy was crying the entire time because he did not need any help with his emotions, and his mom was sending him here because he needed help with his emotions. And he was like, but this is just an emotions class and I don't need that. And so he spent most of the time crying, and we were like, we should maybe change the name so they don't think it's specifically that, where we then have created Rebalance instead of ER.
That's pretty funny. Well, I don't know if I can quite top that one, but we'll try here. So many years ago, we took a group of people to a camp in the summer, as a lot of people do in youth ministry. And on this particular night at camp, they were given this was middle school, so they were given the middle school age kids a chance to go out and have a chance just to be alone under the nighttime sky and just talk to God. And for a lot of kids, this was the first time, or they weren't even sure if God was there. And so this particular young man goes out, and he recounts this story later that night in a cabin small group. But he's out there, and he's like, God, if you're real, I need a sign. And within like a few seconds, this bug flew into his ear, and he clearly during small group shared that like that was God. Like in all serious, like everybody's trying not to laugh, but in all seriousness, he's saying, I know God's real because this bug flew into my ear. So,
hey, he asked for a sign. That's what God had to work with, the bug. Well, cool. Well, that's super awesome. You guys have a ton of experience in ministry, but also a lot of background in this area of mental health. So let's jump in, because I think as we're in ministry, it's I think at times, maybe over the years, it's been something that's been compartmentalized or separated, but we know that there is a lot of overlap in dealing with kids, their mental health, as we are getting into ministry. So what are some things that you guys maybe notice when it comes to mental health of today's young people?
I think what I'm noticing is a reminder that mental health is more out there now. So everybody's talking about it, but it also is mental health in the sense of how can we help kids, adults, people find joy, find hope, find belonging, where I think before, when people talked about mental health, it was like, well, what are you diagnosed with? What are you needing like actual therapy for? But I think now we're looking at it as mental health of bringing joy to people and having them find that place where they belong in the world and life, where I think that has been missing for many of our youth and also some of the adults in the world.
Yeah, I agree with that, Megan. And I think in addition, there's definitely the mental health of young people has declined, I would say, in my years of ministry. Like it seems like more and more young people are dealing with mental. It's not. It doesn't seem like it is. Even the statistics show more and more young people are dealing with mental health challenges. More and more young people are diagnosed. So we definitely have seen an uptake. So the number of kids that are coming into our ministries, where we're doing ministry, are dealing with various levels. And I know in a minute or so, in a bit, we'll get into maybe some of what might be going on or why, but just definitely the increase in number of young people dealing with things. I think an example would be at another camp I was at more recently, just in the evenings, the number of times that leaders were having to go to cabins because young people were having panic attacks. Like it was just way. I never even heard of that early on in ministry. I didn't even think, we didn't think kids were having panic attacks. I guess they could have been, but they weren't. Now it's obvious, and the number of kids having them has definitely increased.
I think we have to look at it too, that a lot of these kids are looking at, their traumas differently than we are. And so breaking up with your middle school girlfriend does bring some mental health problems to the kids right now, where I think years ago it was like, get over it, move on, and life just kept going. And now I think these issues, because they have so many other things going on and that we haven't dealt with or helped them with, that those smaller things are actually big for them, and we have to understand that and be willing to like help them through that, even if we think they're small problems.
Yeah, and as you think about that, I guess I'm curious your guys' thoughts, because I know, you look back at kids, 15, 20 years ago, and like you said, Chip and Megan, someone might say get over it, or you weren't seeing as many like panic attacks. Kids weren't like, oh, I can't go because of my mental health, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. How much of that is just awareness and culture and kind of having the words to say, and how much do you think is like they're actually feeling something totally different than they did back then? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's probably the $1 million question, Cory. If we get that right, we might, write a book off this podcast. I think it's a lot of different things. There's things we know and things we don't know. So I do think some of it's language. If I go way back to when I was a kid, like in my household, we didn't talk about you didn't talk about feelings. Whether you dealt with it well or not, you probably, some of the ways if you did well in school and that's how you dealt with it, that was probably praised, right? But then if you went and got in trouble and rebelled, you both may have been dealing with similar things, but how you reacted, one got you praise and one got you in trouble. So there is some of that. I think we didn't put words to things, as Megan was saying. We didn't have ways to talk about it. But I definitely would say, and I think research supports this, I know research supports this, at least since the early 2000s, and 2001 to 2007, as we began to see technology and things begin to evolve, that research shows that that's definitely had an impact on our young people in terms of the screen time, social media, and that sort of thing has definitely had an impact. So I think there is the talking about it, more willingness to say we're in a therapeutic time where there's more acceptance of talking about how you're feeling, but there's also things that are having a negative impact that didn't exist 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And like Chip, like you were saying, the social media and stuff, our kids are able to access stuff that are adult situations. They participate in the news more than most of us did when we were in middle school or high school, because it's on TikTok or it's on, whatever they're watching, YouTube, and they can watch it for 30 seconds and see about this war or this situation. And they have to, take on those feelings and understand those feelings, but don't necessarily have the adult like emotional ability
Yeah,
to
correct.
be
Yeah.
able to process that or separate that from, oh, well, now I have to go to school and also think about this maybe war that's going on that I watched on TikTok, where when we were in middle school, high school, like there was wars going on, but unless you sat and watched with your parents in the evening news, which many kids did not, you knew about it, but you didn't like feel like it was part of your life. And I think they feel like a lot of these things are a part of their life, not just out there in the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, even for us, for adults, I think like adults, 20 years ago also weren't taking in all of the news of the world all at once every day too. I read something a little while ago that someone had said, and I forget where it was from, but that we weren't designed to be able to think about like the trauma of like everywhere all at once, but rather, people would only know about their community and the surrounding communities and what's going on, and so that kind of like dumbing down of our empathy, or just overwhelmed with everything that's going on. Like I feel that as an adult, as well. So I mean, I guess even with that, what are some things you guys are noticing in the mental health of our leaders today?
I think what you're bringing up there, and that that real time, like kind of playing off, Megan, what you were just saying, like it's on TikTok, it's real time too. Like you're seeing things happen sometimes right when they happen, which is really hard because nobody's even put any context to it, or you're seeing it happen very soon, and then you have, I think the other thing that's challenging then is you have whoever's producing that particular TikTok or that particular message has their opinion or their way that they're looking at it, that their perspective. So it's just coming to you from a person's perspective on that's very different than other, that they may or may not, who knows what that perspective is like in terms of, so you have all that happening. So our young leaders are still in that place where, do I believe this? Do I accept this? Is it is it real or not? Even especially today, is it true or not? Is it real or not? They may or may not even be process. We'd hope they're processing it that way, but they've grown up in this world, and maybe they haven't been prepared well even as young leaders to figure out, is this real? Do I turn it off and do I take a break? Those kind of things.
And I think now that we're looking at youth mental health so focused, those young leaders that we kind of missed over, but did live through learning on the internet, or seeing things on the internet, they haven't had the adults in their lives of like, how do you process this? They don't have that skill set. And I know we're focusing on the kids to give them some sort of skill set, but how do we do that when we have young leaders who don't have that skill set, young leaders who don't understand how to separate one emotion from the other, or their actions from, like, oh, stop watching this because I know it brings me this or causes this problem. How do we do that? And so I think we do need to look at our young leaders and what do they need to feel like they have a sense of belonging with somebody, so that they can have somebody to talk through some of these things that they see on the internet or that they are hearing from the kids or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because I think that it's just now that we're seeing, because the research on all this is kind of just coming out in terms of the impact it's having, like what you're saying, Megan, like it's just now they're being told, hey, it's okay to turn your phone off, or it's okay to question if what you're hearing or seeing is true or not. That they've had all these years where it wasn't that way, and then now they're coming to us, and many times their parents didn't have the toolbox to help them figure that out. And so I think a lot of leaders coming into wanting to do ministry do need a lot of coaching and encouragement and help, even how to process and think about all these things.
And what about leaders? I mean, we mentioned younger leaders too, or people coming into ministry, but what about some of the leaders who've been there for a long time and have seen this like major shift, and, have maybe, an old school way that they've dealt with it? And, I know I've watched a lot of leaders who are learning and growing and trying to figure that out, but Yeah, have you noticed anything different or different challenges with the different generations of leaders who are working with youth?
I think with that, I mean, the older leaders, I think
Veterans.
having, yes, um, do need to take into consideration that these young adult leaders are looking for different things than they were when they were 25 being young adult leaders. They are in need of different things. They are in need of communication and a culture that creates, you know, a place where these young adult leaders are like, oh, I go to work because I also feel safe there. I feel like I belong. And I think older adult leaders were like, well, I just went to work and I did my job and I liked it, or I had bad days, but then I just came back the next day and did it. Where I think the young adult leaders are continually like, well, they look at it more as a whole life. And we looked at it as what this is work and this is, when we go home. And so paying attention to that as older leaders is probably going to be very important.
Yeah, I feel like I'm one of those older leaders that's out there, and I think I look back on my early years in ministry, and I wish I had known some of the things that I knew later in ministry, because I still though because even though I love what I did and we worked hard, like I didn't pay attention to some of these things. I remember a story, I've shared the story in other places as well, but the story where I had a middle school student who attempted suicide early on in my ministry, and I remember not panicking, but like almost like going like, what do I do? Because I didn't grow up in a home that talked about this. I didn't feel like my training in youth ministry up to that point had really dealt with this very much. It was kind of like, how do you share the gospel and how do you help somebody grow closer to God? So I think one of the values we do see today is you do see more and more people, both in the world of the pastor, you see pastors and Bible scholars, as well as psychologists and psychiatrists who are believers, bringing things to us that didn't exist before, that are really helping us show that like we can't separate our spiritual and emotional lives. Like God didn't create us that way. But there has to be, kind of, Cory, going back to your question, there has to be an openness to those of us that are a little bit older to say, okay, that makes sense. And I'm glad we know this now. How do we bring this into training our leaders to do better?
As kind of going back a little bit to, the mental health issues as well as adolescent development, how do we differentiate between those two things when we're observing or interacting with kids and seeing what's going on?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Adolescent development, to me, I feel like it's one of those things that we sometimes talk about early on and then we forget about it. And so then as we're going through, we almost forget things that we learn. I think it's super important that we keep that in mind, Cory, that we never, as God's designed us, we go through different stages of life. We're children, young children, infants, all the way up to older adults. And we've learned a lot about what happens during those periods of time. That's, either developmentally, physically, emotionally, even spiritually. And so I do think we have to keep those things in mind and remember, even I used to do a thing when I would train leaders, younger leaders, and say, okay, we're going to pause. I want everybody now to think back to when you were 13 years old. What do you remember? What do you remember how you felt? Because I do think we can forget sometimes that this thing called adolescent development that now seems to start earlier, maybe 9 or 10, and seems to go into your mid to late 20s. That's one thing that has changed, that the time frame for adolescence has grown, but the developmental things that are happening and need to happen for us to begin then to become a young adult and an adult are going on. So there's changes happening physically, and this is not an adolescent development class, so we don't need to go into all that. But sometimes we can misread something as maybe a mental health or emotional issue. Megan brought up the example before. Sometimes a middle school boy and middle school girl start dating, which is so funny in middle school, right? You remember those things, like dating might mean that they text each other, right?
Yes.
But if that gets cut off, it's pretty normal, depending on where things were, that somebody might be sad or angry or upset. And typically, if in adolescence, that's going to last, depending on the young person's personality and so forth, that's going to last anywhere from a couple hours to maybe up to a couple weeks, right? So I think when you see that, you don't have to be all of a sudden like, oh no, they're an emotional, like this is so bad. Like well, no, it's kind of normal. They're kind of working through the emotions of having a relationship not work out the way they had hoped. And then I think the mental health piece becomes, if it's several weeks later and you're still seeing a person struggling, then you might think, okay, maybe we need to look into this.
And I think along those same lines, to kind of talk about that, like Chip, you really did a great overview of it. But to remember too that these kids are adolescents. And so when they show up angry or upset or seem like they're in like some sort of, mental crisis, that it's, could be something small or something bigger that you need to investigate, but knowing and walking into it of like, hey, this is not about me. It's about the girlfriend that stopped texting last night, or it's about mom who left without putting breakfast out, or, the teacher that yelled at me. And so kids carry those feelings because they can't separate it to the next space, where most, not all, but most adults are able to be like, oh, I had a bad morning. I'm not going to walk into my first meeting at work and be all angry and grumpy. Well, kids can't do that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that they're in mental health crisis, but it does mean, like we have to walk into it knowing that, hey, their problems, their issues carry on further than most of adults, and to remind ourselves of that.
That's really good, Megan. And if I can do a little plug, if you haven't watched either of the Inside Out movies, they're actually put together. The woman that kind of helped consult that, Lisa D'Amour, is like a really sharp psychologist that just knows her stuff, and it actually teaches us a lot about adolescent development, as well as then what also is what Megan was just sharing, like how emotions are dealt with and thoughts are dealt with. And it's a fun watch, but you actually can learn a lot from it. Might be easier than reading a textbook.
There you go. Some homework for our folks. Well, and as we're in that, I am, I have an 11-year-old who actually just got broken up with his girlfriend this week, and or sort of girlfriend. I mean, they don't usually talk much in person. They text a little bit. So it's like, I don't know. But so we're walking through that. So I get that. And then my wife and I lead our high school group ministry at our church. And so just jumped back into that within the last year. And I've felt some of those tensions of connecting with the kid and trying to differentiate, okay, wait, how do I approach this? What are they actually feeling? Is this this deep thing that I don't know how to address? Is this something that is kind of a normal thing, like, some of the kids I've worked with in the past? And so I think it's important. And I'm sure there's a lot of our leaders who, are kind of always trying to figure out, do I need to have the mental health training for this conversation, or is this just one of those regular kinds of things? So as we think about that and our role as leaders, it'd be good to jump in and think about how to help our leaders think about some of these different things. So what are some things that leaders can think about? Like, what is our role as we're navigating this space of, not just figuring out what is or what isn't mental health, but even dealing with some of the mental health situations too?
I think, making sure we're walking in knowing that the mental health, like I mentioned before, is about getting them to belong and finding hope and joy, not diagnosing. So we are not, medical practitioners. That is not our role. We've always had a place where you can, send kids if you think they need additional help, but not our role to help diagnose or figure out their plan. Our role is to create a solid and as genuine relationship as we possibly can with each of those kids, to know, hey, is this something more to dive into? Not to, hey, can I find out all the details of your trauma? But let me just be here to be that, can I listen to you? How much can I listen to you? I'm here to support and have that relationship. And so I think focusing on that as our young leaders, or any leaders, adult leaders, we need to be like, how can I make the best relationship with this youth that definitely needs a relationship? And how do I make it different with this youth that needs a different relationship out of me? And so I think that is where we need to bring our focus on the relationship building and how to do that with each youth.
Yeah. And I think, totally agreeing with that, that sense that, Megan, I'd say it again, we're not going into ministry as mental health professionals. We're going in as caring, safe, loving adults that want to share the hope and love of Jesus. So I think we have to keep that in front of us. I think what Megan's bringing up, though, is because the world has changed and a lot of young people don't feel like they have safe relationships or safe spaces, that as we create the environment in our youth ministries, that we have the ability to create places that kids can, let that guard down, that, we haven't talked about it, but there's that whole, a lot of kids, because they face various difficult things in their lives. You hear the word trauma a lot. With that is that impacts our brains, that God has given us to a place where if I'm living in a situation where I just feel like there's a lot of stress, that I have a hard time just relaxing and being able to chill out and feel safe. And so as a person who's we can create those environments in our small groups, in our large group meetings, when we have appointments with kids, like we can create that. So we're learning skills maybe that I would say they're relational skills, even though the mental health world, calls them mental health skills. I think they're basic relationship skills. And I think probably the one that, if I could say for a second, the one that comes to my mind the most is this ability to create spaces where we really learn how to listen. Young people in general, even our young leaders, have not had places where they just feel like somebody's listening to them, truly listening. And again, this could be a whole nother podcast, Cory, but like the whole idea that like it takes work to listen. It always has. It's not a new thing, but it takes a lot of work. At this time of the world that we live in, there's so many distractions, so many things, like right now, it hasn't happened, fortunately, but like if I heard my phone buzz, 5 feet away from me right now, like it distracts me, right? I'm kind of going, oh, who's trying to get in touch with me, right? And so if I'm talking to Megan and that's going through my mind, I'm not really listening to Megan, right? I'm kind of thinking about my phone or whatever else might be in my mind. And what a gift that we can offer both to our leaders and to our young people. And again, it might sound like it comes from the mental health world. Oh, you have to be a good listener to be a good counselor, a good therapist. That's true. But I think since the beginning of time, God said, I want you to be a good listener. And there's just example after example in scripture where, we can see places where Jesus listened well, where we can see where James, talks about being quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. Like there's just places throughout scripture where we realize that listening is super important.
And I think so many of us have not been trained on that relationship building skill of listening. Most of us were raised and then continue to be, oh, let me give you the quick advice. Let me tell you how to fix the problem. And our kids are seeing the problem fix is actually something they found on TikTok. They're not actually asking us as the adult in their life to fix the problem or solve the problem. They know where they can probably find the answer, and it's not actually us. And so they just want someone to listen to them, to hear what they're sharing. And so that way we're not just giving them advice. The more advice you actually give, most of these teenagers and young adults are like, they're like, I don't want that. I'm not going to listen to that. But we're not trained to just listen to it and say, oh, that's awful. I'm so sorry. How can, is there something I can do, instead of saying, well, let me tell you.
Yeah. I mean, being a good listener is a really great skill in all aspects of life. I mean, it's not just, and in ministry, I think it's obviously like really important. It's something in Youth for Christ, we talk about something called 3-Story, which, talks about meeting kids where they are, listening to their story first, right? And then connecting that to our own personal stories and connecting it to God's story. And as I've learned those kinds of things and practice that more with kids, I've found myself even practicing that with friends or other adults and seeing like how much deeper we can go when I can be first a listener and not just, getting below the surface from that. So I think that is really, really important and helpful as a good starting place for anything, right? What about so obviously there's skills of, that we can employ. Listening is a really good starting point. But as we think about our leaders and even thinking about ways they can connect with kids, what do they need to do to also take care of themselves or prepare themselves for this space. I think, as we kind of come in day after day, where more and more kids are dealing with these hard situations or traumas, or just talking about them and sharing them, I think that's a different space for leaders than maybe it was before, where, at least for me, I would walk into, a ministry setting and it's, hey, what's up? High five, talking about sports or different things. And now it's like kids sometimes are ready to go deep and share these hard things. You're like, oh, okay, we're doing that right now. So I've got to come in maybe in a different mental, or spiritual or emotional space than maybe I did 15 years ago.
Well, I think that's true, Cory, but here's an interesting thing that I've thought about. I can remember 15 or 20 plus years ago pulling up for a youth ministry event and feeling anxious. And it might just be like, do we have everything? All the different questions that, is the room going to be ready? Do we have everything we need? Are all the leaders going to show up? Is this one young person's going to show up that tends to create problems? Right. And I felt like probably all I ever did was, take one deep breath, say, okay, we got this, and just jump in. Right. And I probably, looking back now, there are probably some things I could have been doing differently. But one of them, not only being for myself, I think about the other leaders too that are coming in. Like, are we really seriously thinking about, our own mental health, our own spiritual health, in terms of like, how am I feeling? How am I doing? Am I even asking my other leaders, how are you doing? And are there some things we can be doing that might help us be in a better place than? So when we walk into that room, we're not the ones being triggered or the ones being anxious or upset. We're actually ready to help young people who might be coming in feeling those ways and thinking those ways. Your thoughts on that, Megan? I think Megan has some pretty good insight into this.
Yeah, and just to kind of go back, like if you're going in anxious, or you have two leaders that are leading a group and they're in disagreement about something that has nothing to do with the Bible study, the kids pick up on that. And so if you're in an anxious state, if you're angry about something or frustrated, you can't bring the kids to a feeling of calm and preparedness to hear the word. If you're like, okay, we're gonna, you're frantic, they're going to just come to the frantic side. And so you as leaders need to be able to go in knowing, like, I'm ready, I'm at peace, I'm ready to share what I need to share. And your teammates also need to be on board with that. One of the things that we use in Rebalance, which is the mental health program that we run, is a bunch of calm down techniques, along with a whole different curriculum and everything. But we use these calm down techniques also with our staff. We do it in staff meetings sometimes. There's just simple, easy ones to use that you can be like, hey, I can tell you're a little frustrated. Maybe you should do a magic mustache and take a few breaths before we walk into this group. Or, hey, we should, take some breaths and do this, so that we can be where the kids need to be. Because if we're walking in not there, we're never going to get them there. We're never going to create a relationship that's deep enough to be able to share the word if they're not calm enough to hear it. We need to get them to the point of listening. If we're learning how to listen, then we need to be able to make sure we have that skill so that they can come to listen. If we're anxious, we need to calm that down so they're not coming at us with more anxiety. And so working on that skill and using some of those calm downs or prayer, which is definitely amazing for young adults, any leaders coming in, to be able to pray and calm yourself before you walk into whatever you might be walking into with these kids, is an amazing tool to use.
Megan, that's great. And Chip, I want to throw out too, as I think about that, we serve on the leader formation team with Youth for Christ and talk a lot of slowing down, abiding kind of space. That also pops into my mind as thinking about a leader who is, leading kids and trying to be in that right space mentally. Some of it is, how do I deal with anxiousness? Some of it might be like, I need to slow down, turn off my phone for a bit, pray, spend time with God. Are there any other things you would add to that, Chip, or lean into that space too, or connect the two?
Well, what I feel like we're talking about a little bit is this idea of how aware are we to what's happening internally with us. And that's mentally, emotionally, physically. So there is a sense where I think there's a huge value in us as leaders saying, I need to make sure that I'm growing and allowing God to work on me internally around those areas. So like, sometimes I remember sometimes when I was anxious, I might feel it in my gut. Right. And so like, okay, that should be like a clue to me to say, like with what Megan was just saying, okay, I begin to know what happens when I'm feeling anxious. I'm aware of that. Like, and it's different for everybody. And so how can I grow in becoming more aware of how I deal with these different things? Or how can I grow with like what triggers me? Like I remember having a young person say something during a meeting once, and I remember feeling like, ooh, like, and I'm like, whoa. Now, when I was younger, I'm like, whatever, I'll blow that off and kind of just deal with the situation. But now it's like, okay, why did that bother me so much? Like, this is a 12-year-old. Like, why is what they're saying really making a big deal to me, And so like becoming more aware, and there's different ways we can do that, right? I think there's a sense where, we're willing to invest in that ourselves. That could mean I might realize I could benefit from talking to a counselor or a spiritual director or spiritual advisor, somebody, a coach, somebody who could just help me begin to ask some of those deeper questions to become more aware. Sometimes God reveals that to us directly. If we slow down, in a quiet time, it's not just a quick, I'm going to read this passage of scripture and I'll be good for the rest of the day, but I'm going to actually slow down and create space for God to speak to me through scripture, speak to me through a book I'm reading, to speak to me through nature, to speak to me through my wife, whoever it might be. I slow down enough to be able to receive that. So I think things like that, there are great books you can read. We've in a lot of our resources that we provide for YFC staff, we talk about a book called The Emotionally Healthy Leader by Pete Scazzaro, that he kind of walked through some things in there to help us grow. And we've created some trails and resources to help our staff, first of all, become a healthy leader. Our mental and emotional and spiritual well-being needs to be put first so that we can then, as Megan was saying, then be that non-anxious presence and be Jesus' hands and feet to the young people that we're working with.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and speaking of resources, so Megan, you lead this program, Rebalance. You are trained in Trust Based Relational Intervention. I think I got that right. Are there, I would love to give you even a couple minutes to talk about, what you do in Rebalance a little bit. And also, are there resources that, obviously I know we're sharing that in YFC and connecting that in YFC. Are there resources that folks outside of Youth for Christ can tap into in that space as well?
Yeah, so Rebalance, we created it about 7 years ago, and it combines three different evidence-based programming with a curriculum that we wrote on top of it. So the first one, like Cory said, is Trust Based Relational Intervention. So that is from TCU, and that is a way to interact with kids to have them have felt safety. We're working on connection first and empowering before we work on any sort of correction with these kids. If you start going with correction first, you're not going to create that relationship or build that relationship that you need to have felt safety, to have trust. And then we also use motivational interviewing. So this is a way to have open-ended questions and a better understanding of how to have those questions to dig deeper into what the child is actually wanting to talk about. And then the final one that we use is roundtables, which is discussion-based, 2 pages on morals and values that we all think kids understand and know, but like listening is one of the programs, and honesty, we assume kids now know that, and they don't. And so we have a curriculum based off of that, where we play games that are based off of the word. So if the word is boundaries, we're playing all games in bubble suits, so kids can physically see and talk about physical boundaries. And then we have a discussion about it. But during that time, we're running calm down techniques. We're specifically playing the games with them to have connection, giving them choices, and so that they can empower them in our Rebalance classes that we run here at my local YFC chapter, but also now in about 15 other chapters across the country. And so, just kind of using those tools to create a deeper relationship And then we're inviting them into all of our other programming. Like we have City Life here. We're inviting them in because now they're ready to listen and hear, and they're actually wanting to be, they're very self-motivated of like, hey, why are you like this? Why haven't you kicked me out? I've been this bad kid. And by using our tools, we're like, nope, you're part of this. And now come into these other places to hear. And Rebalance has given us this great opportunity to meet kids that wouldn't just come to our center, that need the help, that need the relationship building, that need that safe space. And it's just been overwhelming watching kids be able to find trusted adults to have that in their lives. And so one of the skills that we do, though, is the calm downs, like you said, Cory. I don't know if you wanted me to give you an example of one now or.
Yeah, I think that would be great too. Where we want to include some different practices throughout these podcast episodes. So I think it'd be awesome if you want to walk us through one of those techniques. So this is something that you would say would be used with kids, but also even leaders could probably utilize too, right?
Correct. So if you're a leader and you're driving up and about to walk into a group of kids, you might want to do this before you walk in because you had a bad day or you're just not sure what you're going to say or do. We do this all the time in our Rebalance classes. And then we also do it in our larger groups and our Bible studies. We're like, hey, we're kind of all chaotic right now. Let's do a calm down so we can all get back together and kind of be solidified and ready to move forward. So the one I want to tell you all today, we're going to do it 2 times, but it's recommended 4 to 8 times. You really do need to breathe a lot to be able to really start to feel that calm come to your body. But what we're doing today is called 4-7-8 breathing. So
Cory, Cory, real quick, Cory, I think you and I need to do this while she's talking about it.
Yeah, no, let's do it.
Okay. All right.
So the one we're going to do today is called 4-7-8 breathing. The best way to start any of these different breathing techniques is to make sure you breathe out before we really begin. You're going to put your tongue on your roof of your mouth, and we're just going to breathe out. And then I'm going to do the counting. We're going to breathe in through your nose 4 times for 4 seconds. And then you're going to hold it for 7 seconds. And then you're going to breathe out of your mouth for 8 seconds. So in nose 4, hold 7, out mouth 8. With your tongue kind of on the roof of your mouth while you're doing this. So it kind of lets all of the air out. So everybody breathe out and put your tongue up. And now breathe in through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that is
why didn't we do this before the podcast started? What are we thinking?
Oh, I've been doing it the whole podcast, so I'm not sure what you're doing, Chip, but I'm over here deep breathing all day long.
Yeah, I mean, even in those couple times, that was good. You said we should do this. What'd you say? Did you say 4 times? How many times it should do?
4 to 8.
4 to 8.
4 to 8 really, I mean, it's a couple minutes of your life that you need to be able to do this, but it resets your breathing, re-regulates your heart. I will tell you, if you've never done any deep breathing techniques or calm down techniques, starting at 4 is probably advisable. By 8, you might feel lightheaded because you actually haven't been deep breathing most of your life. And so, work your way up to 8, but take those minutes because calming yourself, calming the kids makes your relationships so much better and so more successful in moving the gospel forward, in moving any conversation forward, because you're all in the right space with your mind, your heart, and your body.
No, that's awesome. So as we're moving toward wrapping up, I think one kind of last question too, as we think about this, if a leader is here in this conversation, we've talked about a lot of different things, right? And maybe they're at the front end of beginning to understand this mental health conversation. What are some starting places for people? I know we've mentioned a couple different resources, breathing techniques, listening. What are the couple of things or couple of takeaways that you would say, start here, start with this, and then kind of build on it?
I think, especially with how we've ended here, I think a couple of these things, I mean, there's some very basic things we can do. First is just, am I beginning to become more aware of how I'm doing as a leader? So do I realize I'm kind of running around like a chicken with its head cut off a lot of the time, and I'm super anxious and busy, and I snap real quick at my leaders or kids sometimes if I'm working on something, trying to get something ready, and a kid comes up and I'm like, kind of like that example, Cory, you were giving, that kid that was pushing you a lot in the beginning. Like, how am I dealing with that? So I think if you begin to see that, like I can feel that at times I'm a little out of control, just even doing something as simple as what Megan just shared, I'm going to start to incorporate some breathing exercises, or I'm going to take a little bit more time each day with Jesus and just slow down. And then, maybe I'll talk to is there a mentor in my life? Is there a person who's been doing ministry longer than me, or a pastor, or maybe even a mental health coach that maybe I could just start to talk if I feel like I could use help at having somebody process some of these things. And then I think with that, paying attention to my other leaders as well, and watching how they're doing, and asking even for feedback for me. Like, hey, what do you notice about me when I come into a Bible study or come into a large group meeting? Like, how am I doing? And let's share with each other what we notice, and just beginning to, again, grow in that awareness.
And I think, Chip, on that is, creating that environment where it's safe to be like, hey, I think you might need a snack. Hey, I think, you're angry, like whatever it might be, to know that we're out there to support each other. This is not some, competition of who's going to do this programming or whatever, but to be able to support and create that environment in each of our chapters or wherever you are, that you have, coworkers that, you can be like, oh, they're just telling me from their heart that I might need something, or I'm going to tell them from my heart that they might need something. And so to be able to do that, I think another thing to be okay with while you're running a program is to be okay that you're not going to necessarily, we've got to stop whatever curriculum that we're running, because this isn't they're not hearing it. And it's okay. Like, we want to get to the curriculum and we want to get to these things. But if we don't have that base of the really good relationship, if we don't have that environment of calm in a space where they're like, okay, I'm ready to listen and hear, we might have to stop doing the focus on the curriculum for a while until we create that space. Years back, you would just show up for your youth group and you're like, I'll just listen to whatever they have to say and I'm going to eat pizza. And now kids are like, well, no, I can be on my phone and I can be messing with my friend and not actually be a part of it. And so making sure that we're like, okay, let's pause the curriculum. Let's all get to the same safe space, or at least a calmer area, by using those calm down techniques, and then moving into the curriculum. And that might be in 2 weeks or next week, but you might have to take pause with that and be okay that we've got to create solid relationships before we try to do teaching.
Awesome. And then another thing I heard, through this conversation is the listening piece, working on that. So I feel like, Chip, you said, it's us slowing down, taking care of ourselves, creating that space, the way we interact with our own leaders, and making sure that relational safe space is there before folks on the curriculum, and just listening, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining in today. This has been a really awesome conversation, and I know we've just touched on, even kind of the surface of a number of these things. So this is something we'll definitely need to revisit and continue to dig deeper with. We'll definitely have resources linked to this as well in the show notes. But thank you guys for being on here and taking time today, and I look forward to some more conversations with you guys in the future.
Thanks, Cory. It was a lot of fun, Megan. It was fun talking with you.
Yeah, it was great talking to both of y'all. Thanks so much.
First a Follower podcast is a production of Youth for Christ USA. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe. And if you would like to learn more about how to get connected with Youth for Christ in your area, visit yfc.net.